The smell of garlic and soy sauce drifted through the nearly empty corridor of Station Harmony 7's Food Expo Hall. David Park flipped another piece of marinated beef on his portable grill, watching the edges caramelize while vendors 3 booths down served shimmering plates of something that looked like liquid starlight to a crowd of at least 50 aliens. Nobody had stopped at his booth in 2 hours. A Prithian food critic floated past, its crystalline body refracting the station lights into rainbow patterns across the floor. It paused long enough to examine David's setup with what might have been discussed, though reading Prithian expressions was nearly impossible for humans. You actually burn your nutrients. The translator made its voice sound like wind chimes. How primitively destructive. David forced a smile. It's called cooking. The heat breaks down proteins and creates new flavors through the Maillard reaction. Barbaric. The Prithian drifted away, joining the crowd at a Valorian booth where a chef was apparently constructing food at the molecular level. The gathered aliens applauded as a dish materialized from nothing, already perfectly arranged. David plated his bulgogi with kimchi fried rice and set on the counter. He would eat it himself, like he had eaten the previous 5 dishes. At least his grandmother's recipes tasted good, even if nobody else in the galaxy seemed to care. Station Administrator Talven approached, all 4 arms crossed in a way that probably meant disapproval across several species. The Quellen's scaled face was hard to read, but his tone came through the translator clearly enough. Mr. Park, I'm afraid we won't be reserving space for human vendors next year. Talven gestured at the empty area around David's booth. The expo is meant to showcase culinary advancement, not historical curiosities. Historical curiosities? David set down his spatula a little harder than necessary. Humans have been cooking for hundreds of thousands of years. We've developed thousands of techniques, millions of recipes, entire cultures built around food. Yes, well, Talven's upper arms made a dismissive wave. The galaxy has moved beyond applying direct thermal energy to organic matter. It's inefficient. It destroys nutritional value. It's frankly quite primitive. David watched the administrator walk away, stopping to praise a Quellen vendor whose booth featured some kind of nutrient mist that customers inhaled directly. The crowd, there was even larger than the one at the Valorian booth. He looked down at his bulgogi. The beef was perfectly cooked, tender and flavorful, balanced by the tangy spice of the kimchi and the slight sweetness of the rice. His grandmother had taught him this recipe when he was 8 years old, standing on a step stool to reach the counter of her kitchen in New Seattle. She had told him that food was love made visible, that cooking for someone was the best way to show you cared. The galaxy apparently disagreed. David stayed until the expo officially closed at midnight, long after the other human vendors had packed up and left. He cleaned his grill, stored his ingredients, and cooked one more meal for himself. Simple this time. Grilled chicken with garlic and herbs, roasted vegetables, a piece of fresh bread he had baked that morning. He ate slowly, trying not to feel discouraged. 15 years since first contact, and humans were still seen as the backwards newcomers who did everything wrong. The other species had faster ships, better computers, more advanced medicine, and apparently superior food. David finished his meal and started packing up his booth. The expo hall was empty now, just rows of darkened booths and the hum of the station's life support systems. He thought he saw something move in the shadows near the far wall, but when he looked directly at the spot, there was nothing there, probably just tired. It had been a long, disappointing day. He sealed the last container and headed toward his quarters, leaving behind the faint smell of garlic and roasted meat in the empty hall. What David didn't see was the figure that emerged from the maintenance access panel after he left. Something large moved through the shadows, stopping at his abandoned booth. It lowered its head to the counter where David had been cooking, breathing in deeply. The scent of cooked meat hung in the air. Real meat, prepared with heat and spices and care. Not the flavorless synthetic proteins that sustained but never satisfied. Not the nutrient paste dispensed from sterile machines. Food. The figure retreated back into the shadows, but not before carefully taking a small container David had left behind. Inside was a portion of bulgogi, forgotten in his rush to pack up and leave in the darkness of the maintenance corridors. Riven tasted human food for the first time. The Ashkari's multiple eyes widened as flavors exploded across her tongue. Salt and sweet and spice, the richness of fat, the complexity of fermented vegetables. It was like nothing she had ever experienced in 20 cycles of traveling through the galaxy. For the first time since leaving her homeworld, Riven felt something other than hunger. She ate slowly, savoring every bite of the small portion. When it was gone, she remained motionless in the dark, thinking about the human who had created this miracle. The one who had stayed late, cooking with care even though nobody watched. The one who had made something that actually tasted like food was meant to taste. Riven made a decision. She would find this human again. She would watch him cook. And maybe, if she was careful enough not to frighten him, she would taste his food again. The galaxy's apex predator settled into the shadows to wait and plan. For the first time in years, she had something to hope for. 3 days after the expo ended, Station Harmony 7's maintenance chief filed a report about unauthorized access to the ventilation system. Something was moving through the restricted corridors. Something large enough to trigger motion sensors, but fast enough to disappear before security arrived. David knew nothing about this as he prepared his small booth for another day of disappointing sales. The permanent food court on level 14 was supposed to be better than the expo. At least here, people came looking for meals rather than spectacle. But his first 2 days had been just as empty as the expo had been. He fired up his grill and started prep work for lunch service. Thin-sliced pork belly for Korean tacos, vegetables for stir-fry, rice in the steamer. His hands moved through familiar patterns, the same ones his grandmother had taught him, the same ones he had perfected over 15 years running restaurants on Earth. The Valorian vendor across the corridor was already serving customers. David could see the line from his booth, at least 20 aliens waiting for molecularly constructed meals that cost 3 times what he charged. He tried not to be bitter about it. Around noon, David noticed something odd. One of his storage containers was slightly open, the lid not quite sealed the way he always left it. Inside, a portion of yesterday's grilled chicken was missing. Not all of it, just one piece, taken cleanly without disturbing the rest. He checked his security footage, but the camera angle didn't cover the storage area. Probably just a glitch in the container seal. Or maybe he had miscounted yesterday, but then it happened again the next day. And the day after that, small amounts of food, always taken when David wasn't looking. Never enough to be a serious loss, but definitely deliberate. Someone or something was stealing his cooking. David started paying closer attention. He caught glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, shadows that seemed too solid to be tricks of the light. Once, late in the evening after the food court had closed, he heard something breathing in the ventilation shaft above his booth. He should have reported it. Station security needed to know about potential intruders, but David had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to recognize hunger when you saw it. And whoever or whatever was taking his food wasn't being destructive or greedy. They were being careful, almost respectful. On the 7th day, David made a decision. He prepared a full meal after closing, better than his usual dinner. Slow-braised short ribs in a rich sauce, roasted root vegetables, fresh rice. He plated everything carefully, set it on the corner of his prep counter, and then deliberately turned his back and pretended to clean his grill. He counted to 100 in his head, slowly. When he turned around, the plate was empty. "You're welcome," David said to the empty food court. Something moved in the shadows near the ceiling. He couldn't see details, just the suggestion of something large shifting position. "I'll leave dinner here tomorrow, too," David continued, keeping his voice calm. "You don't have to hide. I'm not going to hurt you." No response, but the quality of the silence had changed. Whatever was up, there was listening. David finished his cleanup and left, making sure to leave the food court lights dimmed rather than switching them off completely. Behind him, Riven descended from the ventilation shaft and approached the counter where the empty plate Saturday, the human knew she was there. He had known for days, probably, and instead of calling security, instead of setting traps or trying to capture her, he had cooked for her. Riven's translator device had recorded his words. She replayed them now, listening to the tone as much as the meaning. There was no fear in the human's voice. No anger, just an offer, simple and direct. she thought about revealing herself. But Ashkari presence caused panic among the other species. Even station security carried weapons specifically designed to take down her kind, weapons they were trained to use at the first sign of threat. Riven had learned to stay hidden, to move through stations like a ghost, to never let anyone see her unless absolutely necessary. But this human was different. He had fed her, knowing something was taking his food. That was not how prey species usually behave toward predators. Riven made her decision. Tomorrow, she would let him see her. Just for a moment. Just enough to see how he would react. The next evening, David prepared another meal. This time he made his grandmother's special stew, the one she had always cooked on cold nights when David needed comfort. Beef and vegetables simmered for hours in a rich broth flavored with wine and herbs. He added extra portions to his usual recipe, filling a large bowl. But he set the bowl on the counter and sat down on his prep stool, facing away from it. "I'm going to sit here and not look," he said to the empty food court. "Take your time." He heard the soft sound of something large dropping to the floor. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, moving across the tile. David kept his eyes fixed on the far wall, his heart beating faster, but his breathing steady. The footsteps stopped behind him. He could hear breathing now, deep and controlled. Whatever was back there was huge, probably twice his size. "The stew's still hot," David said. "It's better that way." A long pause. Then the sound of the bowl being lifted from the counter. David waited, listening to the quiet sounds of eating. After several minutes, the bowl was placed back on the counter, empty. The footsteps move away, but slower this time. Less rushed. "Same time tomorrow?" David asked. Another pause, longer this time. Then a voice, deep and slightly rough through a translator device. "Yes." David smiled, but didn't turn around. "Good. I'll make something special." The footsteps retreated into the shadows. David sat for another 5 minutes before standing and turning around. The bowl was empty, clean completely. And next to it, carefully placed, was a small piece of what looked like carved stone. A gift, perhaps, or a thank you. David picked it up, feeling the weight of it. Somewhere in the station, something dangerous had just chosen to trust him. Tomorrow, he would find out what. David arrived at his booth 2 hours before opening the next morning. He brought ingredients for 5 different dishes, each one representing a different cooking technique his grandmother had taught him. If tonight was going to be a proper introduction, he wanted to show what human cooking could really do. The morning passed slowly. A handful of customers stopped by, mostly humans from other parts of the station who were tired of synthetic foods. David served them with his usual care, but his mind was on the evening ahead. What would he be facing? The size and weight of those footsteps suggested something massive. The careful way it moved spoke of intelligence and control. And that voice, rough but clear, had sounded almost nervous. By closing time, David had worked himself into a state of anxious anticipation. He locked the front of his booth and began cooking. Pan-seared fish with lemon butter sauce. Grilled vegetables with herbs. Fresh pasta with a simple tomato and basil sauce. Roasted chicken with crispy skin. And finally, his grandmother's dumplings, each one folded by hand the way she had taught him. He arranged everything on the counter like an offering. Then he pulled up his stool and sat with his back to the food, just like the night before. "I'm here," he said to the empty food court. "Whenever you're ready." The shadows moved. David heard the now familiar sound of something large dropping from the ventilation system. The footsteps were slower tonight, less cautious. They stopped about 10 feet behind him. "You brought much food," the translated voice said. "I wanted to show you different styles," David replied, still not turning around. "Different techniques. Cooking isn't just one thing." Silence for a moment. Then, "Why do you not look at me? Other species always look when they sense my kind." David considered his answer carefully. "Because I figured you've spent enough time being stared at. Sometimes it's nice when someone just treats you normal." A sound that might have been surprise or possibly amusement. "You think ignoring an Ashkari is normal treatment?" So that was what she was. David had heard of the Ashkari, though he had never seen one. The galaxy's apex predators, the species that made other species nervous just by existing. Station security briefings warned humans to evacuate immediately if they ever encountered one. I'm not ignoring you, David said. I'm giving you space. There's a difference. Another pause. The footsteps came closer, stopping just behind David's left shoulder. He could feel body heat radiating from something very large and very alive. I could kill you before you could turn around, the voice said. It wasn't a threat, just a statement of fact. Yeah, probably, David agreed. But you won't. You've been eating my food for over a week, and you haven't hurt me yet. I figure if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. You are strange for a prey species. Humans aren't really prey anymore. We used to be a long time ago. Then we figure out tools and fire and cooking. David gestured at the food on the counter. We're kind of in the middle now. We understand both sides. The Ashgary moved past him, and David caught his first glimpse in his peripheral vision. Dark scale hide, easily 8 feet tall, arms that ended in clawed hands. She moved to the counter and examined the food he had prepared. This is why your cooking is different, she said. You were predators who learned to be prey, then became predators again. Something like that, David said. We learned that killing to eat doesn't have to be cruel. And we learned that eating doesn't have to be just about survival. She picked up one of the dumplings, examining it closely. Explain this. My grandmother made those every Sunday. They take hours to prepare, and they're not more nutritious than faster foods. But she made them anyway, because cooking them was how she showed love. That's what human food is really about. It's not just fuel, it's connection. The Ashgary ate the dumplings slowly. David heard a soft sound that might have been satisfaction. Station food is not this, she said. They give my kind nutrient paste. Correct proteins, correct calories. No taste, no connection. She turned to look at him, and David finally met her eyes. All 6 of them, arranged in 2 rows across a face that was definitely predatory, but not as frightening as he had expected. I am Riven, she said. I came to this station because I heard rumors of a species that still kills to eat. I thought perhaps they would understand what it means to be hungry for more than just nutrition. David, he replied. David Park. And yeah, we understand that. Riven worked her way through the dishes he had prepared, trying each one with careful attention. David watched, no longer hiding his observation. She ate with precision, taking time to identify flavors and textures. When she finished the last dish, she set the empty plate down gently. I have been traveling for 3 cycles since leaving my homeworld, Riven said. Every station, every world, the food is the same. Synthetic, efficient, tasteless. I began to forget what real food was supposed to be. She looked at David with an expression he couldn't quite read. You reminded me. You can come back tomorrow, David offered. I'll cook something new. Your security forces will not like that. Ashgary are not welcome in civilian areas. Then we'll figure something out. Maybe I can get you a pass, or talk to station administration. You shouldn't have to hide just to get a decent meal. Riven studied him for a long moment. You would do this? Advocate for an Ashgary? David shrugged. You like my cooking. That makes you a customer. I take care of my customers. For the first time, Riven made a sound that was definitely amusement. You are very strange, David Park. Yeah, I get that a lot. He smiled. Same time tomorrow. Yes, but I'll try to arrive earlier before you close. If you truly intend to make me welcome, I should not have to hide. Deal. David stood and extended his hand. Riven looked at it, confused, until he explained the human gesture. She reached out carefully, engulfing his hand in clawed fingers that could have crushed bones, but held with surprising gentleness. Tomorrow would be interesting. The Quellan security officer arrived at David's booth 3 hours before opening. 2 more officers flanked him, hands resting on weapons designed to take down large predators. David was in the middle of prep work and looked up from chopping vegetables with obvious annoyance. Mr. Park, we need to discuss a serious security concern, the lead officer said. His translator rendered his tone as something between official and threatening. If this is about my permit, it's paid through the end of the cycle, David replied, not stopping his knife work. This is about the Ashgary that's been seen near your booth. David set down his knife slowly. Riven is a customer. She pays for her meals. The security officer's 4 arms tensed simultaneously. You've been feeding it? Do you have any idea how dangerous these creatures are? She. Riven is a she. And yeah, I know she's dangerous. So, am I when someone threatens my customers? Mr. Park, this isn't a joke. Ashgari have been classified as high-risk species. Their presence in civilian areas requires special authorization and security escorts. Then authorize her, David said. Give her whatever paperwork she needs. She's not hurting anyone. The station administrator has already made his decision. If the Ashgari returns, it will be detained and removed from the station, and your vendor license will be revoked for endangering public safety. The officers left, but their message was clear. David had until evening to figure out a solution, or Riven would be taken into custody the moment she appeared. He spent the afternoon cooking anyway, preparing dishes with more care than usual. If this was going to be Riven's last meal at his booth, it would be a good one that she arrived just after closing, dropping from the ventilation shaft with practiced ease. But this time, she wasn't alone. 3 more Ashgari emerged from the shadows, each one as large and imposing as Riven. I told my kin about your food, Riven said, gesturing to the others. They wanted to taste it themselves. David looked at the 4 apex predators crowded into a small booth area and made a decision that would probably get him fired. Okay, everybody seed. This is going to take a while. He cooked for 3 hours straight, preparing enough food for 4 Ashgari with appetites he could barely comprehend. The other human vendors, packing up their booths, stopped to stare at the scene. Some looked scared. Others looked confused. A few looked impressed. One of them, an older woman who ran a breakfast booth, approached cautiously. David, what are you doing? Cooking, he replied, flipping a row of steaks on his overworked grill. What's it look like? It looks like you're feeding the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They're customers, Betty. Same as anyone else. He glanced at her. You got any of those breakfast burritos left? I could use some help here. Betty stared at him for a long moment, then at the Ashgari who were watching this exchange with interest. Finally, she sighed and went back to her booth. 5 minutes later, she returned with a container of breakfast burritos, still warm. I must be crazy, she muttered, setting them on David's counter. But I didn't spend 40 years running restaurants to let a colleague run out of food. Other human vendors began contributing. Sandwiches, soup, fresh bread, desserts. Within an hour, David's booth had become a full-scale feast, and the Ashgari were experiencing human cooking from a dozen different sources. That's when Administrator Talvan arrived with a full security team. This gathering is illegal, Talvan announced, his voice carrying across the food court. All Ashgari individuals are required to disperse immediately or face detention. Riven stood, her full height, making even the security officers step back. We have broken no laws. We are eating food purchased from licensed vendors. Your kind requires special permits for civilian area access. You have no such permits. Then provide them, David said, stepping between Riven and the security team. Process whatever paperwork you need. But these people aren't criminals for wanting a decent meal. People. Talvan's tone dripped with scorn. Mr. Park, these are apex predators. They are tolerated in the galaxy for their security services, but they cannot be allowed to move freely among civilian populations. Why not? Betty stepped up beside David. They've been here for hours. Nobody's been hurt. Nobody's even been threatened. More human vendors joined them, forming a line between the Ashgari and the security forces. Talvan stared at them, all 4 arms raised in a gesture of disbelief. You would defend these creatures? Do you not understand what they are capable of? Do you not understand what you're doing? David shot back. You're treating sentient beings like animals because they look scary. That's not security policy. That's prejudice. It is practical reality. Every species in this galaxy fears the Ashgari for good reason. Maybe that's the problem, David said. Maybe fear isn't a good enough reason to deny someone basic dignity. The standoff continued for several minutes before Riven spoke again. We will leave peacefully, but know this, Administrator. Humans offered us something tonight that no other species has offered in all our cycles of travel. They offered us a place at the table. She looked at David. We will not forget this. The Ashgari departed through the maintenance corridors, disappearing into the shadows they knew so well. The security team followed them to ensure they actually left, leaving Talvin alone with the human vendors. "This isn't over," the administrator said. "I will be filing formal complaints about this incident." "File whatever you want," David replied. "But while you're doing that, maybe think about what just happened here. We fed some people who are hungry. That's supposed to be what food vendors do." After Talvin left, Betty put a hand on David's shoulder. "You know this is going to cause problems, right?" "Yeah, probably." "Good. Just want to make sure you knew what you were getting into." She smiled. "Because I'm in two now. If those Ashgary come back, they're getting my breakfast burritos whether security likes it or not." The other vendors murmured agreement. David looked at them, this collection of human cooks who had spent weeks being mocked and dismissed by the Galactic community. Now they were standing together for customers that most of the galaxy wanted to keep hidden away. His grandmother would have been proud. The Galactic Council representative arrived on Station Harmony 6 days after the incident in the food court. Her name was Surith, a tall Valorian whose crystalline body reflected light in patterns that supposedly indicated mood. Right now, those patterns suggested she was very unhappy. David stood in the station's central plaza along with every other human vendor, watching workers set up tables and chairs according to his specifications. Talvin stood nearby, radiating disapproval from all four arms. "This demonstration of yours is highly irregular," Surith said, her translated voice sharp. The council agreed to observe, not to participate. "That's fine," David replied. "You don't have to eat anything. Just watch." Behind the council representatives, a crowd of station residents gathered at a safe distance. Security barriers had been erected to separate observers from the plaza, though David had argued against them. This was supposed to be a meal, not a spectacle. Riven emerged from a side corridor, followed by 15 other Ashgary. The crowd gasped and pulled back, despite the barriers. Even Surith's crystalline form flickered with what might have been alarm, but the Ashgary didn't approach the crowd. They walked calmly to the tables David had prepared, settling into seats that had been reinforced to hold their weight. They sat like anyone else waiting for a meal, patient and quiet. David addressed the crowd, his voice amplified by the station's public announcement system. "Most of you have heard that humans cook food using primitive methods. Heat application, fermentation, smoking, grilling. You've been told it's inefficient and backwards." He gestured to the grills and stoves his fellow vendors had set up. "But human cooking isn't about efficiency. It's about transformation. It's about taking raw ingredients and changing them into something that nourishes both body and soul." Betty fired up her grill, starting the first round of breakfast items. Other vendors began their preparations, filling the plaza with the smells of garlic, herbs, grilling meat, and fresh bread. "We cook with fire because our ancestors learned to control it hundreds of thousands of years ago," David continued. "We cook with care because food is how we show love to each other. We cook together because eating together builds community." He walked to where Riven sat. "The Ashgary are apex predators. Every species in this galaxy fears them instinctively. But fear isn't the same as understanding. And understanding starts with something simple." David placed a plate in front of Riven. Grilled steak, seasoned simply with salt and pepper. Roasted vegetables on the side. It starts with breaking bread together. Or in this case, sharing meat. Riven picked up the human-style utensils David had taught her to use. She cut a piece of steak and ate it slowly, savoring the flavor. Around her, other Ashgary received their meals and began eating with the same careful attention. The crowd watched in silence. Whatever they had expected, this calm dining scene wasn't it. Surith approached David, her crystalline surface shifting patterns rapidly. "What exactly is this supposed to prove? That you can feed dangerous predators?" "No," David said. "It's supposed to prove that they're not just dangerous predators. They're people. They have culture, preferences, needs beyond basic survival. Just like every other species in the galaxy. The Ashgary have always had access to adequate nutrition. Adequate isn't the same as good. Would you eat flavorless nutrient paste every day for the rest of your life if you had a choice?" Surith's patterns flickered in a way that might have been thoughtful. the security concerns remain valid. Ashgari are physically capable of tremendous violence. So are humans. So are a lot of species. Being capable of violence doesn't mean you're going to commit it. David gestured to the Ashgari. Look at them. Really look. Do they seem like mindless monsters to you? Riven finished her meal and stood, drawing nervous attention from the crowd. But she simply walked to where David and Surith stood, moving with deliberate calm. I will speak plainly, Riven said. My people have been isolated for generations because we frighten others. We're given security contracts and military positions because those are the only roles where our nature is considered acceptable. But we are not machines. We are not weapons. We are living beings who want what all living beings want. Connection, purpose, a place to belong. She looked at the assembled council representatives. Humans understand this because they walk the same path we walk now. They were prey who became predators, then learned to be something more than either. They know both fear and power. That is why they can sit with us without panic. That is why their food satisfies us in ways that synthetic nutrition never could. Surith's patterns shifted again. You're suggesting the human cuisine could serve as a bridge for Ashgari integration? I'm suggesting that treating us like people instead of problems would be a good start, Riven replied. And that food is a reasonable place to begin. David added, every culture in human history has used shared meals as a way to build trust. Business deals happen over dinner. Families bond in kitchens. Strangers become friends over coffee. It's basic sociology. Sociology that relies on predator-prey dynamics your species has overcome, Surith pointed out. Most galactic species are herbivores or filter feeders. They do not have your experience with predation. Then maybe it's time they got some, Betty said, stepping forward with plates for the council representatives. We brought vegetarian options, nomat y prumiza, but they're cooked with the same care and attention we give everything we make. Surith accepted the plate with obvious reluctance. She examined the grilled vegetables, the seasoned grains, the herb-infused bread. After a long moment, she took a small bite. Her crystalline body flashed through a rapid series of patterns that drew attention from everyone in the plaza. When she spoke again, her translated voice was quieter. This is not what I expected. Good or bad? David asked. Different. Complex. Interesting. Surith took another bite, then looked at David with what might have been new respect. You may have a valid point about the social significance of shared meals. Around the plaza, other council representatives tried the food David's team had prepared. The crowd watched, fascination replacing fear as even the most skeptical officials acknowledged that human cooking had merit. Riven returned to her seat, where the other Ashgari were finishing their meals. For the first time in cycles, they were eating in public, treated like customers rather than threats. It was a small thing, really. Just a meal share between species. But sometimes small things were the beginning of everything. Station Harmony. 7 looked different 3 months later. The food court on level 14 had expanded to twice its original size, and 5 new human restaurants had opened across various sections of the station. But the biggest change was the one most visitors noticed first. Ashgari worked alongside humans in almost every establishment. They cooked, they served, they welcomed customers who were slowly learning not to flinch when they approached. It wasn't perfect, and there were still incidents, but progress was happening. David's restaurant, the shared table, occupied a corner position with views of the station's observation deck. It had become something more than just a place to eat. Galactic Council members held informal meetings there. Security officers on break shared tables with Ashgari colleagues. Species that had never spoken to each other were having conversations over bowls of soup and plates of grilled vegetables. Tonight, the restaurant was hosting a special event. Representatives from 4 other stations were visiting to learn about the integration program. David watched from the kitchen as Riven greeted the guests. Her movements practiced now, her translated words smooth and welcoming. 2 Valorian officials at table 7, she called to the kitchen. They requested the vegetarian tasting menu. Got it, David replied, already assembling plates. Beside him, another Ashgari named Kryn handled the grill with the same precision David had taught Riven months ago. The two of them worked in comfortable rhythm, the kind of efficiency that only came from practice and trust. Betty appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her breakfast booth had become a full restaurant 2 levels up, and she spent most mornings now training Ashgary cooks in the art of human breakfast foods. The delegation from Station Meridian wants to know if our training program can be exported, she told David. They've got 12 Ashgary requesting work permits, and nobody knows what to do with them. Tell them we'll send instructors next cycle, David said, plating the last element of the tasting menu. Riven's already volunteered to lead the first group. She's come a long way from hiding in maintenance shafts. We all have. David carried the plates out himself, wanting to see the officials' reactions firsthand. The Valorians accepted their meals with polite interest that turned to genuine surprise after the first bites. David watched as they tried each dish, their crystalline bodies shifting through patterns he had learned to recognize as pleasure and approval. "This is remarkable," one of them said. "Our briefing materials suggested human cuisine was primitive and unrefined." "Funny how often briefing materials turn out to be wrong," David replied. "Maybe you should actually try things before deciding they have no value." The Valorians' patterns shifted to something that looked like embarrassment, a fair criticism. "We are learning that many of our assumptions about humanity were incorrect, and about the Ashgary, that as well." The official glanced at Riven, who was delivering meals to another table. "The council is discussing permanent changes to integration policies. Your program here has been referenced multiple times in committee meetings." David returned to the kitchen, where Kren was working on the next round of orders. The young Ashgary had been one of the first to respond when Riven sent word that humans on Station Harmony 7 were offering real work to any who wanted it. "How are we doing on the braised short ribs?" David asked. "Another hour in the braise," Kren replied. "But the texture is already better than yesterday's batch. I think I'm starting to understand the timing. You're a natural. My grandmother would have loved teaching you." Kren's multiple eyes focused on David with an expression he had learned to read as gratitude. "Riven told us about your grandmother, about how she taught you that food is love made visible. She was a smart woman. I think she would be proud of what you have built here. Not just the restaurant, the bridge." David looked out at the dining room, where a dozen different species shared tables and conversation. Ashgary served meals alongside human staff. Customers who had been terrified 3 months ago now came regularly, bringing friends and colleagues. "It's not just me," David said. "Every human vendor on this station contributed. So did Riven and every Ashgary who took the risk of coming here. And so did the customers who decided to give us a chance. But you started it. You fed Riven when you could have called security. That first choice made everything else possible." Later that evening, after the restaurant closed and the cleaning was done, David sat at his favorite table with Riven, sharing a late dinner. It had become their tradition, these quiet moments after the chaos of service ended. "Station Meridian is just the beginning," Riven said, working her way through a plate of David's latest experiment with Korean-Italian fusion. "I received messages from 3 more stations today, all requesting information about the program. Think you're ready to be a teacher? I learned from the best." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "My people are calling you friend to the Ashgary. It is not a title we give lightly. I just cooked dinner. That's literally my job. You did more than that. You saw past what we are to who we are. That is not cooking. That is wisdom." David smiled. "My grandmother used to say that anyone can follow a recipe, but real cooking is about understanding what people need. Sometimes they need nutrition. Sometimes they need comfort. Sometimes they just need to know that someone cares enough to make them a good meal. And sometimes they need to know they are not monsters," Riven added softly. "You were never monsters. The galaxy just forgot how to look past the scary parts to see the people underneath." They finished their meal in comfortable silence. 2 members of very different species who had somehow become friends over shared food and mutual respect. Outside the restaurant windows, the station continued its endless rotation, full of beings from across the galaxy learning to coexist. David thought about his grandmother, about her small kitchen in New Seattle, where she had taught him that food was love made visible. She had probably never imagined her recipes would help integrate apex predators into galactic society, but she would have understood the principle behind it. Good food, cooked with care, shared freely. Sometimes the simplest things really did change the world, or in this case, the galaxy.